Hey, everybody, it's Tommy Canale, and welcome back to Before the Lights podcast, the show that tells you how they made their mark. He's a former political editor at the Las Vegas Sun. He was a corporal in the U.S. Marines and the managing editor at 5 News. Currently, the senior reporter at gambling.com and handles the Las Vegas Mafia history and Mob Summit Facebook group pages. He was the best friend to Jeff Kierman and a close friend of mine. Please welcome back to the show, Larry Henry. Larry, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Tommy. Great to be on. I really appreciate you having me on.
You know, going to be informative, but before we get to Jeff, I want to catch listeners up on a couple things you're doing. Tell everybody how crazy the sports betting world is right now.
You know, one of the best things I've ever done is with gambling.com. It's one of the best jobs I've ever had. It's a publicly traded company, global company. I work for a North American group that covers the U.S. and Canada. And one of the things that's happened in the last couple of years, as you know, we both have strong Nevada ties. At one point, Nevada was the only place you could bet on sports, really, and on anything, really, until Atlantic City came along and so forth. But now, Tommy, 33 states and Washington, D.C. have legal sports betting, as you know. I know we'll talk about Frank Rosenthal as we go forward, but as you know, illegal bookmaking was a dominant way that the mob made money for a long time. Still is. There's still illegal bookmaking, obviously, but now it's legal in 33 states. District of Columbia, California, Texas, and Florida, the 3 most populous states, still don't have sports betting, so there's room to grow. Now, to grow. Now, the next big level is iGaming. The hard part's convincing the casino owners that they want people to come in and spend money on entertainment and food and things like that. But iGaming is a massive revenue producer for, FanDuel, DraftKings, companies like that. It's slots, craps, roulette, poker, all that, with live dealers in many cases. So that's the next big booming thing in the industry. It's really growing. And to some degree, and we've talked about this, it's always been that way in Nevada. To some degree, it's even recession proof. The whole gaming industry. So it's an exciting thing to be covering. And I'm really, I have a lot of fun with it, do a lot of stuff about Las Vegas and Nevada. So yeah, thanks for asking about that. But it's a booming industry. It's
gone from the mob doing numbers on the street to a astronomical global enterprise.
Massive. And as you know, FanDuel, which is the biggest sports book operator, mobile sports book operator, now is in the Fremont in Las Vegas. They don't have an app in Nevada yet. You have to still register in person in Nevada, register your mobile sports betting app that they don't have that yet. And nor does DraftKings and some of those kind of global sports betting companies, but it's coming. And FanDuel now is in the Fremont, which is interesting because the Fremont at one point was one of the most mobbed up casinos in Nevada, and now owned by Boyd, a publicly traded company, with FanDuel having a sports book inside the Fremont. So it's just really interesting. A lot of really interesting developments in that world.
Fremont, the last standing casino that used to be part of the Argent Corporation.
The last one, a little piece of the marina.
Oh, that's right.
Incorporated into you had the, and you know this better than anybody, Tommy. It was the Hacienda, the Stardust, the marina, and the Fremont. A little bit of the marina hotel part was incorporated into the MGM. Yeah. Hacienda torn down. That's where Mandalay Bay is. Resorts World is where the Stardust was. So yeah, Las Vegas has changed dramatically over the decades.
I'm going to put a couple links in the show notes for listeners so you can join the 2 Facebook pages, Las Vegas Mafia History and Mob Summit. It's been a while since you've been on the show. Catch everybody up. How many people are involved in both pages now?
It's really interesting. They're both private, but send me a request. And obviously, I did that because public groups sometimes get a lot of those hucksters, the crypto hucksters and people like that to sort of clog up the flow. The Las Vegas Mafia History Group now has more than 30,000 people. And it's just fantastic. As you know, Tommy, you're a great member of that group. It's journalists, it's former mobsters, the offspring of mobsters. And so the conversations are really engaging and exciting about the history of Las Vegas in terms not just of the mob, but just a lot of casino history and things like that. And then Mob Summit, which is a group that sprung out of this convention we put together a few years ago in Las Vegas, has about 3,500 members. That's sort of the non-Las Vegas, the global gaming, the global mob and mafia stuff. That's where all that goes. So please, thank you for mentioning that, Tommy. Please, everyone, please send me a request to join. Love to have people join.
we're on the show to talk about Jeff Gearman, who was killed and murdered outside of his home. He's a native of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He started as an intern at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. He's an author. He was an investigative reporter, a columnist. He covered organized crime, the government, politics, and courts. Tell my listeners how you met Jeff and how you became friends.
Jeff moved to Las Vegas in the late 70s. I moved into Nevada in the early 80s. And we became, I was in Northern Nevada. He was in Las Vegas. I was a reporter at the Reno newspaper, and he was a reporter in Las Vegas. And so we got to know each other that way at first. And then we just, our friendship and relationship grew over the years. I mostly covered politics. I was a political editor and political reporter, covered the legislature in Carson City. And you know, Jeff touched on a little bit of everything. He covered not just the mob and federal courts, but he also covered politics and, you know, had great sources. And so we came to know each other that way. And our friendship grew over time. In fact, I moved to Las Vegas to work for the Las Vegas Sun because of Jeff. He had talked to Mike O'Callahan, who, as you know, was a real populist governor and became the editor of the Las Vegas Sun. And so Jeff talked to Mike O'Callahan at some point, and I went down to Las Vegas to work for the Sun, and because Jeff really got me down there. And we, in fact, we lived in the same apartment complex. It was sort of I don't know if you remember, Tommy, the Breakers. It's still there. It's way out on, it's way out on West Sahara. Now, at that time,
that was all there was there. It was that.
That was it.
And
that
then,
was it.
There was one like reflection, something in the corner of right at the lakes. There was another apartment complex. It was the Breakers and another one in the corner. And that was it.
That was it. After that, it was all the dead. You can see Red Rock. Now, there was no Red Rock Casino, no ballpark where the Aviators play. None of that was back there. So yeah, but it was great. It was Jeff Gearman was there, Steve Sebelius from who worked with us at the Sun, now at the RJ, the political editor of the Review Journal. John Sarb, who'd worked in the governor's office. There were a lot of people at the Breakers, and it was just a great place to be. So I'd moved down there because of Jeff and went to work at the Las Vegas Sun. But yeah, so just over time, just over the years, our friendship really grew, and to this day, and the shock still is it's just unacceptable what happened. But my respect toward Jeff has always been enormous, and even as a reporter competing against him, and then when we were colleagues, just what a enormous professional he was. His adherence to the details and the facts, and his relentless pursuit of scoops. He just loved to get scoops. He was hyper competitive, loved to get scoops, loved to beat everybody on stories. And as a result of that, developed an enormous network of sources. Everybody trusted Jeff because, Tommy, how it is in the news business, there's several levels of conversations you will have with people. One is on the record. We're talking about something, and, you tell me something about some news story or something, I can quote you. And then there's not for attribution, where you'll tell me things. I won't put your name on it, but I'll use what you tell me and verify it with other sources. Then there's off the record, which is, I'm not even going to use what you tell me. Give me the background information. I'll go find it out somewhere else and keep digging. So Jeff was really good with all levels of that, and people knew they could trust him. And, his source network, what really made Jeff so effective, and I know this is a long answer to your question about how I got to know him, but it fits the respect part I'm talking about. He really had, the sort of the three F's. He was fearless, factual, and friendly. By friendly, I mean, people opened up to Jeff because they knew they could trust him. And came to him. I remember one time everywhere we would go after work to different, night spots where political figures hung out and underworld figures hung out. Tommy, you'll remember better than I do. In those days, it was TGI Fridays was one of those places over there. Was it Trop or Flamingo or somewhere over there?
Yep.
Gordon Biersch was a place where you'd run into. Big Dogs on Sahara, owned by Tom Wiesner, you'd run into. So, and Jeff always sort of used those sort of nightlife excursions. He would run into people. They would come to him. He would talk to them in a friendly environment. Jack's Bar up in Carson City, across from the legislative building. And I remember one time, even when the Canopy opened on Fremont Street Experience. Jeff and I went down there, and Steve Wynn was there with his wife Elaine, and they came over to Jeff, and so he always used those sort of, and that's what I mean by friendly. He was real open and a great communicator, had great people skills, and so people felt comfortable with him and knew they could trust him with private conversations that might not end up in the newspaper if the understanding was it was off the record. So, he was just a consummate competitive journalist that I had enormous respect for.
Do you know how Jeff got from Wisconsin to Vegas?
Here's what I think happened. He was always a hard-hitting, after-hours, aggressive reporter, never watched the clock, always, was trying to dig out stories. And so when he was interning at the Milwaukee Sentinel, he loved crime reporting. Milwaukee, a total mobbed up town. The Balistraries, I know we'll talk a little bit about Ned Day. The Balistrary, crime family was active in Milwaukee. And so Jeff had a real understanding of all of that. Worked for the Sentinel as an intern and was an aggressive intern. And my understanding is he was on the phone one day with a friend of his, always kind of wanted to get to Las Vegas, as I understand it. He was on the phone with a friend of his in the Las Vegas Sun newsroom one day. This is my understanding. And Chris Crystal, who, Las Vegas has had a history of enormous reporters who've just been out, and editors who've been outstanding. One was Chris Crystal, and she was, I think, the city editor at the time. And a friend of Jeff's was on the phone with Jeff. And Jeff said, "Hey, I'm looking for a job in Las Vegas." And this person handed the phone to Chris Crystal. And Jeff talked to her, and she said, "Yeah, we have some openings. Come on down." That's my understanding of how it happened. And so Jeff hit the ground running and just became a force at the right time in Las Vegas, as did Ned Day, Myron Borders, Jane Ann Morris, and all these outstanding reporters who made a difference in Nevada because they hit Las Vegas just as the mob was reaching its pinnacle and then beginning to descend because of all the heat put on it. And I would contend, everybody talks about it was the Fed investigations that cracked a lot of the mob stuff, all that true. Surveillance audio in Kansas City of some Las Vegas mobsters on tape, all that obviously, led to the downfall of the mob in Las Vegas. Corporate casinos, late 1960s, corporations were allowed to own casinos, not just individuals. But I would contend that it was reporters like Jeff Garriman, Ned Day, Jane Ann Morris, and people like that who really shined a light on what was going on. So he had come down to Las Vegas in the late 70s, immediately hit the ground running, was covering federal courts, but always had a nose for news and an instinct for what was news, and got it from politics, from political coverage and everything else. One of the things that Jeff was so good at, Tom, and you can tell, I'm not pausing, I'm not taking a breath because I just have so much respect for what Jeff was as a reporter. But one of the things he was so good at, and this is sort of a thing that young reporters, new reporters to the industry can learn from Jeff, and he was helpful at guiding other reporters in the right direction. He was really good at cultivating sources, especially among people in the legal community. He was really good at getting inside sources inside the prosecutor's office. He didn't look down on the administrative assistants and the people who clean the office or whatever. He treated everybody exactly the same way, not because he thought he could use them, because he was just that kind of person. He was very respectful. But he was very effective with lawyers on both sides of a legal issue, whether it was a defense attorney or a prosecutor or a lawyer trying a case to put somebody in prison. Jeff was very good at working lawyers. And those are the ones that have all the information that can get you the kind of scoops that Jeff just constantly turned out. I'm not sure anybody, maybe even nationwide, has ever turned out scoop after scoop after scoop like Jeff did.
We're going to hear from Jeff. I have 4 clips queued up. We're going to listen to 2 of them now. And I want to give credit for these clips. They come from Sam Shad's Nevada Newsmakers in July 21st, 2021 episode. And then Jeff was the host and writer of season 2 of Mobbed Up. And we're going to hear clips from episode 3, Close the Place Down, and episode 7, A Judge Falls from Grace, throughout this show. But the first two clips I'm going to play here back to back are going to piggyback what you just said on how where Jeff, in his own words, talks about he would never give up his sources.
Those were wild days indeed. I remember being summoned to the office of the Metro Intelligence Commander after I wrote a story about police wiretaps involving Bluestein. When I got there, the commander read me my rights and told me he was investigating how I learned about the wiretaps. I didn't give up my sources, and the investigation went nowhere. Back in 1981, I broke a story about Anthony Spilatro's pending federal indictment. Other media picked up on it. So did Oscar Goodman, who also was defending Spilatro. Goodman had long been accusing the feds of misconduct in their sweeping investigation of Spilatro, so the story gave him a chance to take one more swipe at them. He filed a motion seeking to dismiss the indictment on grounds the government had unlawfully leaked out the word. As part of that motion, he subpoenaed me and other reporters in an effort to try to prove the information was coming from the feds. Guess who was handling the case? Claiborne. So the day came when Claiborne held a hearing on Goodman's motion. When Goodman called me to the witness stand, Claiborne went over every paragraph with me, each time asking me to identify the source. Luckily in Nevada, we have a shield law that allows reporters to keep their sources confidential. After I refused to give up my sources, Claiborne decided to respect the law and not hold me in contempt. That ended Goodman's push to get the Spilatro case dismissed and handed the government a victory.
Classic clips from Jeff, basically saying, not telling you, I'll go on the stand. There's a shield law, but I'm never going to give up my sources. And that's what he was known for, would never give up his sources.
Never gave up his sources, and everybody knew they could trust him. So if you look at Jeff's career, Tommy, you know, scoop after scoop, as I've said before, he got more scoops than Baskin Robbins. And part of that is because people knew they could get information to him. So you look at all the stories he broke and constantly was breaking stories.
On those, let me read off a couple, and then you can go from there. He covered the MGM Grand Fire in 1980, the 2000 Stripper Gate, that was AKA Operation G-String, that had all kinds of corruption going on, and the Route 91 Harvest Festival, the shooting. He was the first reporter to report that the shooter fired at the nearby jet fuel tanks first. In 1999, he broke a story with Kathy Scott on the murder of Fat Herbie Blitzstein. In 2000, he wrote the book Murder in Sin City on the death of Ted Binion. I mean, Jeff covered big-time cases.
Covered big-time cases and got scoops on all of that stuff. And it's funny when you mention all those things, all these stories come flooding back. For instance, the Mandalay Bay shooting. I think 60 people were killed. Gunman, as you know, 32nd story of the Mandalay Bay firing down on that festival. Tragedy. You know, people will cover the story. You have to cover the daily story. You know, speaking beyond the tragedy of it, just the news coverage. You go out and you cover the daily stuff. You start working sources. You talk to victims. You talk to. So then a different level of coverage begins, and those are the things that are scoops that nobody else knows, because you have sources in key places who get information to you. I don't know where Jeff got. So the gunman fired at these fuel tanks, as you know better than anybody, Tommy, over there by the airport. Those fuel tanks sat outside within rifle range, obviously, of the Mandalay Bay, and so he fired at those fuel tanks, presumably to see if there would be some sort of explosion or something. Now, how do you find out that as a reporter? You get tipped to it. Some source tells you about it, and that's where Jeff was so effective. I don't know who his source was. I don't know where he got that. But you don't get those kind of really scoop-worthy stories unless some source tips you to it. So someone who was in some position of authority, whether it was law enforcement or investigators or somebody in that level, and Jeff knew everybody. All you had to do was walk into Big Dogs on Sahara or someplace like that with Jeff, and you would see all the people he knew and how all the people got information to him. But that's how he got information. Yeah, like on that Mandalay Bay shooting, someone told him about that. And he also, by the way, he also got other scoops out of that Mandalay Bay. And I don't mean to make it sound like a tragedy is a fertile ground for scoops, but it's what it is, because it leads to changes that are better for the public because of the reporting that people like Jeff do. So one of the things that happened out of that Mandalay Bay shooting is Jeff had found out, presumably, I don't know, where he got it from. Presumably, he got tipped off that the safety procedures that those casinos were supposed to follow, whether it was the Mandalay Bay or others up and down the Strip, they weren't being followed. The paperwork wasn't being submitted, correctly and that sort of thing. So that was another scoop that Jeff got out of that, which led to public policy changes that helps people. And that's the effectiveness of a reporter like Jeff, Tommy. As you know, it's not just the scoop after scoop after scoop. He held public officials accountable for their actions in ways that benefited the public, the little person. Most people don't have a lot of power, and they bump up against people in power and are often quashed by those people in power. That leads to tragedy for them. And so Jeff was on the side of the little person. And was absolutely fearless. He held people accountable in Las Vegas that most people are afraid of, whether it's the LVCVA, the most powerful lobbyists, the casino industry, public officials. Jeff was nonpartisan. I don't even know who Jeff voted for in campaigns, or if he even did vote. He was not a political Republican or Democrat. That wasn't his motive. His motive was to hold public officials accountable. And as a result, he got story after story after story leaked to him, like those ones you mentioned, Tommy. And that's why without Jeff around, it's going to be, there just aren't many people left who. Las Vegas is so transitional. When Jeff started, it was a smallish town. You could pull up to the front of casinos. You could, table games. I remember going to Slots of Fun and playing 25-cent table games, and, buffets were $1.99. Everything. There were no Versace's and Dior's and all that stuff. It's a convention city in a lot of ways now, but it was a smaller town then. And, Jeff, it was a good old boy town. And, Jeff held people accountable that a lot of other people were afraid of. Cracked that sort of good old boyism in Las Vegas by reporting fearlessly on people who do their best to crush you if you report on them like that. And they have their own lapdogs in the media that will come after you. So, Jeff didn't, like Ned Day and others, he wasn't worried about, offending somebody who didn't do what they were supposed to do to help the public.
Speaking of fearless, Jeff's going to tell us a story of some of this reporting and investigating he did that comes to meet him face to face.
Well, let's see. This was back in, 81 or so. And I had written a piece about a guy by the name of Cy Friedman, who was a Justice Court warrant officer in Las Vegas. And he was collecting campaign money for the sheriff at the time. And also he was collecting he was collecting juice money for the mob. So he's doing all of this. He's on the public payroll. He's collecting campaign contributions for the sheriff. He's working for the mob. I do a piece on this, and within a couple of weeks, people started letting the air out of my tires of my car. My back windshield gets smashed. I get threatening phone calls, saying you better watch who you're writing about. And it culminates in there was, like I say, within a couple of weeks, there was a major retirement party on the Las Vegas Strip at the Sands in the ballroom, and it was for the longtime clerk of the court in Las Vegas. And so I'm sitting at the back bar having a drink, and Cy Friedman walks up, and I'd had a couple drinks. I was feeling good, and I said, Cy, when are you going to call off the dogs? Because I'm kind of mad. All these things are happening to me. And he looks at me, recognizes me. And this guy is he was an ex-professional boxer on top of it. And he recognizes me, and he has a drink in his right hand. He throws the drink in my face and then hits me with a left hook. And he had a ring on his hand, and it caught me under my lip, and I ended up having to get 4 stitches. So he whacks me, and I tried to fight back, but it turns out head of security for the Sands was right there, right behind me. I had no idea. And he broke it all up. And so I ended up I go get stitches, and it was, it was kind of a crazy thing. But I kind of was was I saw it as a badge of honor, to be honest with you, something like that. So at least I knew finally that what was going on with it. That he was the one that was doing it, or he was behind it.
I mean, he took that as a badge of honor by getting hit in the face and going to get stitches. But that kind of tells you how fearless he was. He didn't really care if he met you in person or what happened in those situations. And I'm going to play a clip here in a second about Tony Spilotro and when he met Tony Spilotro. So we're going to get into that for a second. But what's your thoughts here in that clip, Larry?
Well, the Juice guy, it shows the way the arrogance of the underworld in Las Vegas from the 40s all the way into the 90s. Herbie Blitzstein was killed in, I think, 96. For a long time, the mob, there's a debate about what did the mob run Las Vegas. That's an exaggeration, but they certainly did things that are sort of unbelievable. And part of what they did was try to intimidate people that they thought they could silence. And back Tommy to the 50s, a guy named Ed Reed, a reporter whose reporting had led to a Pulitzer Prize for the Brooklyn Eagle, had come out to Las Vegas, worked for the Sun, was looking into the mob. He said because it's one of the greatest concentration of mobsters in the country, hoodlums he called them, was at the Desert Inn. And Jack Dragner from Los Angeles was sitting in the Desert Inn and a sheriff was there. It shows how that sort of the public officials were in bed with the mobsters. And Ed Reed was beat up at the Desert Inn. Now fast forward to Jeff Gehrman's era, late 70s and onward. And Jeff got punched. Jeff's car windows were broken. He was threatened in other ways. Ned Day's car was firebombed. He wasn't in it, but there were wanted posters for Ned Day around town. A reporter for the Valley Times, Review Journal, and KLAS TV, whose career was shorter than Jeff's because he died relatively young, but mirrored Jeff's in around the same time frame. So, yeah, those guys just thought they could push people around and did in many cases, and many people were afraid of them. Keep in mind, Tommy, these guys walked around flaunting what they had. They were arrogant in their belief that they controlled that town. Frank Rosenthal, who illegally ran 4 Argent Corp casinos, as you said at the top, he wrote a newspaper column for the Valley Times and the Las Vegas Sun. Can you imagine Al Capone writing a column for the Chicago Tribune and had a TV show?
Right.
So, the arrogance of these
from
people.
From the big disco place in town.
from Jubilee over there by where Planet Hollywood. Just the arrogance of these people. And that arrogance results from having public officials really sort of under control one way or another. And, it was a different town back then. There was this whole, who else is going to run casinos other than the people who did it illegally elsewhere? And they came to Nevada and well, okay, fine. I mean, places like Hot Springs and things like that these people came to Nevada, but it was not that innocent. I mean, these were just extremely arrogant about their dominance of a criminal activity in Las Vegas, and that is an example of that. This guy punches Jeff in the face. He was a public official on one hand, but was collecting juice money for the mob on the other. What was this guy doing? Working on the public payroll.
He also covered organized crime. Tony Spilotro is a very common name in Las Vegas, was portrayed by, Pesci in Casino. Some people say that, he was the guy running Las Vegas at that time. But we're going to hear Jeff tell the story when he goes to a bar and sees Tony Spilotro.
So I'm a young kid, right? I'm just starting out. I'm a cub reporter. My roommate at the time, another young reporter, we decided it's a Saturday night. We decided to go out. Hey, let's go to the. It was a bar that Tony Spilotro hung out, and it was near the Upper Crust restaurant that they also had an interest in. So we're at the bar, and lo and behold, Tony Spilotro's there, and he's there with Robert Conrad, a big Hollywood actor at the time. He was the star of the Wild Wild West series. And so we're just sitting there. It's just those two and us in the bar. It's a small little quaint bar, and there's a bartender and a waitress. So the waitress comes over, and so we say, hey, let's send a drink over to Tony Spilotro. We didn't know any better. And so the waitress goes over, talks to Spilotro, comes back and says, you don't send Mr. Spilotro drinks. He buys you drinks first. And so we learned right off the bat that this guy has, it was like he owned the town, basically.
Classic story. I love that story.
Classic story, and a great summary of what Jeff says at the end about how it was like he ran the town. It was eye-opening for Jeff. By the way, hats off to Sam Shad. I've known Sam for a long time up in Reno and across the states. Sam's Nevada Newsmakers is a great show to this day. And on that show, Jeff was talking about that. Yeah, I mean, that gets back to what we're talking about, which is, I've heard Michael Green, the great historian, UNLV professor, say that, apparently Alan Dorfman, who sort of oversaw the Teamsters loan making apparatus, part of what Jay Sarno had to give up to get a loan for, I guess, Caesars and Circus, was giving Spilotro a gift shop in 1971 in Circus. And so, Spilotro comes down to Las Vegas in the early 70s to be the muscle for the Chicago outfit. Open territory, Las Vegas. Families from all over the place had a piece of different casinos, but the Chicago outfit was arguably the predominant one. Spilotro goes down, and they had previous ones there before Spilotro, Johnny Rosselli and Marshall Caifano and others, were there. But Spilotro comes in the 70s and upped the violence game. He brought in others from Chicago, like Frank Collada, and had a street rackets group called the Hole in the Wall Gang that, really pushed hard on what was going on in Las Vegas with illegal bookies and street rackets, and they took control of that. And that Hole in the Wall Gang would literally knock holes in the wall of businesses and homes and burglarize them and come out. So, it brought a different level of violence to Las Vegas. He was there to oversee street rackets, but also to sort of keep an eye on Rosenthal and the Skim. That was what was going on in Las Vegas. So he runs into Spilotro and an actor, a prominent Hollywood actor. At that time, I think Conrad was huge. I think he was in, was it the Bye Bye Black Sheep or the Wild Wild West?
Wild Wild West.
One or both of those. Yeah, he was a prominent actor at that time and hanging out with a mobster. And it gets back to what I was saying, Tom. If it weren't for people like those tough reporters in Las Vegas, I'm not sure the pressure would have ever really been heightened the way it was. Yes, there was federal pressure and so forth, but it was because of the really aggressive reporting that people like Jeff did. Mm-hmm. And that anecdote, while not all that tragic, it's not like Spilotro did anything to them violently, but it does show how those guys thought or maybe did have a run of the town that allowed them to have a certain level of arrogance that I'm not sure you could have today in Las Vegas.
His reporting led people to be unhappy. That was no secret. And I don't think anybody really thought that somebody would actually kill him over his reporting, but that's what happened. It's a national, worldwide story. He started covering the mismanagement, unlawful conduct, and bullying in the office of the Clark County Public Administrator, Robert Tellis. Larry, do you know how he started investigating Tellis? Do you know how that whole thing began?
Like everything else, that the reason Jeff was such an effective reporter for 44 years, I think he was in Las Vegas, was because people got to him from all walks of life. And he always listened to people. Some reporters gravitate toward those in power. Jeff had sources all over the place in governors' offices and prosecutors' offices and cop shops and lawyers' offices. But people who weren't in positions of authority all the time knew they could get to Jeff, and he would value their story. It was known in the community, if you wanted somebody who was fearless, who was not afraid of powerful people, get it to Jeff. And so he one of the people in that office, and he hasn't been convicted yet, but one of the people in that office contacted Jeff, and they met, I think, at a Starbucks or something informally, which is how this stuff develops. You meet with someone either on the phone or you get together with them in an off the record way, and they began to tell Jeff about what was going on in that office. You know, the alleged bullying and inappropriate relationship apparently with another staff member, and Jeff began to gather steam. He began to piece it together. And, he was a really hardcore fact-based reporter. I sat across from him in the sun and just was so awed by how relentless he was in nailing down facts. He wouldn't go with something without the facts nailed down. So he began to gather steam on this story and put together the facts, and working with editors at the RJ. And when it was time to run the story, they put it together and ran the story. And, at the end of the day, all the major, big, massive, huge stories Jeff covered, Tommy, you go back and look at the things Jeff covered over time. Every big story in Las Vegas just about Jeff broke. In the scheme of things, this wasn't the biggest story Jeff broke. It was a sort of an obscure public administrator. Nobody really knew what he does. He or she, whoever's in that office, nobody really knew what that person does. Handles estates when people die and so forth. But it was kind of an obscure. It wasn't a governor or a senator or something like that. And it was alleged, office inappropriate, sort of a toxic workplace. It wasn't, a murder or something like that. So in the scheme of things, it wasn't the biggest story Jeff ever broke. But, again, because Jeff was on the side of the person who was abused by people in power, he stayed on top of it. And it came as a huge surprise to people that here's a guy who had covered some of the alleged most violent mobsters in the country, a person who took on the most powerful people in Las Vegas, the most powerful movers and shakers in Las Vegas. And I think he took them on because he wanted to, quote, take them on. Mm-hmm. He just wanted to report what they were supposed to be doing in the public's trust. But when he was killed, there was a lot of, curiosity, more than curiosity. There was a lot of, was it somebody in the mob? I mean, a lot of those guys are dead now, mm-hmm. and who could it have been? And that it turned out to be a person who is accused and charged with it. That's the person that the focus was on, came as a surprise to people.
And September 7th, police arrested Robert Tellis on suspicion. He's pleaded not guilty, and he's held without bail. Tellis lost his re-election bid in the Democratic primary after Gearman published results of investigation into allegations that he held a hostile work environment, like you said, and was involved with relationship with a member of his staff. But the day before his murder, police report that Gearman was involved in an altercation with someone outside his house the day before he was killed. They identified a suspect for murder then as Robert Tellis. Larry, from what you know in your investigation, what happened the day before Jeff was killed?
It's all being pieced together. And one of the things about what happened, let me just back up to so he was killed on Friday, September the 2nd. His body wasn't discovered until a neighbor called it in September the 3rd, that Saturday. By the way, strictly ironically, coincidentally, Ned Day died on September 3rd, years earlier in 1987, but just another one of those sort of unusual connections, both from Milwaukee, both tough mob reporters. Anyway, so, as it began to be pieced together, when I heard about it, I was absolutely shocked. And I told a former colleague of mine at the Sun, that was a Saturday that it had come out. And I told a former colleague of mine at the Las Vegas Sun that Sunday, they need to look at this guy, Robert Tellis. We were just chatting because Tellis was so aggressively firing back at Jeff on social media sites and was obviously, from some of the attacks that Tellis was making, angry at Jeff. And so as Jeff kept digging on the story, as it's unfolding, the person who attacked Jeff, whatever happened leading up to it, is still developing. But the person who attacked Jeff that day, the suspect is Tellis. He's been charged, first-degree murder. Jeff comes out. This person hits him with a knife, and apparently stabbed him, I think, 7 times, and violently. this person's DNA is under Jeff's fingernails, according to prosecutors. And so Tellis was arrested. The Review Journal staff very aggressively began to dig into it and find out what happened. And a car was at the scene, a vehicle was at nearby that later was associated with Tellis, had on a straw hat to cover his face.
And a hazmat suit.
Yeah, hazmat, had on an orange vest. A lot of that, the straw hat was chopped up and found at his hat. Now, all of that began to be pieced together, and so he was arrested. Apparently, may have been some self-harm. He had bandages on his arms when he was arrested and so forth. So, fast forward, he claims that the evidence was planted. He's saying that he wants to defend himself. The judge, Levitt, has said, you understand that if you defend yourself, and I'm paraphrasing, and if it doesn't go the way you want, you can't say that you had inadequate counsel. He said he understands that. He's never handled a criminal trial. He was an attorney, came out to Las Vegas from El Paso, had an HVAC job, went to law school, got a law degree, handled 3 trials, civil trials, never handled a criminal trial, even a misdemeanor trial. So that's where we are, Tommy. So what led up to it the day before and what happened that day, and then what happened, after all of that is all going to be a part of the court case and the trial. And we'll know more clearly when that unfolds beyond the arrest report and affidavits and all that stuff. So the trial is scheduled to begin November 6th. There's going to be massive attention on that trial. What happened to Jeff is it shocked the journalism world. It was global news. The nation's most formidable and foremost journalism organizations, investigative reporters and editors, and those groups have come out strongly condemning what happened to Jeff. In fact, IRE is having a conference at UNLV in Jeff's honor about how to dig out records and all that sort of thing. All that's going to come out over time in the trial, Tommy. Tellis says he's going to testify. He's done jailhouse interviews with different reporters and things like that. And so,
have the neighbors said that they know Tellis was there the day before and had the argument with Jeff?
I don't know. Okay. I don't know. A lot of that hasn't come out yet, and I don't know the answer to that. I'm snooping around to see what I can find out, but the answer hasn't really come out about what happened the day before. A lot of that. But, he was caught on, everybody's got, not everybody, a lot of people ring doorbells. And so, these home security cameras caught this person walking down the street with a straw hat that day, the day of. It happened, I think, a little bit before noon on that Friday the 2nd. So, I don't know. In his office, some of the people who worked with him have been on the record saying that he was irate, that, I don't know if irate's the right word, but he was upset that Jeff had continued to dig into some of the emails, or was requesting emails and correspondence that he'd had with staff members. And so, the implication is that he was fuming about the repeated requests that Jeff was seeking leading up to the attack on September 2nd.
From the investigation and research I've done, Tellis's emails have revealed attempts at damage control in the months following the investigation. And on December 7th of 2022, 14 search warrants revealed new information into the investigation. Roberta Lee Kennett, which I believe is the person he had the involvement with, her phone records would prove or disprove any involvement she had in the murder. I know she's not been arrested, but I haven't heard anything since this has come out that they were going to look into her phone records. Have you heard anything more on her?
Well, no. And, she spoke a little bit early on. And as you know, with court cases, a lot of the things that lead up to the arrest, that lead up to the crime, will come out over time, especially in the court case. There'll be in the actual trial, there'll be an enormous amount of attention on that trial. Had been scheduled for the spring, is pushed back to November. But a lot of that's going to come out in the trial, Tommy. There's a lot that's going on now, even some attempt by investigators to get into Jeff's phone. And so you got some issues involving First Amendment rights, the right of report, not to reveal their sources and that sort of thing. So the RJ is fighting the effort to get into his his private documents and phone records and all that, because it could reveal sources. So there's a lot that's still going on, and the investigation is still going on. So we'll know, we'll find out whether anybody else may have been involved. Some of that will come out over time, I'm sure, if not in the court case itself. Right now, to my knowledge, no one else has been taken into custody. Just tell us. But, who knows where it's going to go from now to going forward to November.
A piece of information I think is vital for listeners to hear is not only has he been charged for murder, but also murder of an elderly person, which could add 20 years to his sentence if he's convicted. So he's looking at two murder charges here, not just murder, but also murder of an elderly person as well. So we'll see how this all plans out. I'm guessing, Larry, you're going to be in attendance for the trial?
Yeah, I'm going to come down for it and report on it. And I'm very curious to see what happens. Real quickly, let me just respond to the elderly thing. Jeff was 69 and really sort of at the height of his game. I mean, he 44 years, some odd years of reporting in Las Vegas was absolutely relentless and tireless. And that continued into his recent years. The editor of the Las Vegas Review-Journal said that, Jeff had no intention of retiring. And it kind of goes back to the way Las Vegas has changed after the years, especially over the years, especially with the construction of the Mirage in '89, the mega resort, the implosion of a lot of those old mobbed up casinos, the Stardust behind you, Tommy, all those places. A lot of people in Las Vegas, from reporters to tourists and so forth, never been to the Stardust or the Sands, the Riviera, the Desert Inn. People like Jeff bridged that era from the old to the new. So there's a lot of institutional knowledge that's gone with Jeff. Now, yeah, the elderly person part comes in. Jeff was 69, but in no way was he was absolutely at the top of his game. And so, I'm gonna stay on top of it. I'm going to continue to write about it, report on it. All these things you've talked about that we still don't know the answer to, continue to dig. It's absolutely unacceptable that a journalist like Jeff, a person like Jeff, period, could be attacked and killed in that way. It's unacceptable. And the community outrage was enormous, is enormous still, not just in Las Vegas, but also globally in the journalism community and among those who care about the truth and the truth being snuffed out. The outrage is enormous.
We'll come back on and do another show after the trial. Give listeners a recap of what you covered, some of these things that may come up. I'm sure there's going to be some stuff that's going to come to the surface. And we'll do a recap show after that's all done and close it all up.
I'm looking forward to it. It just keeps, more's going to come out. And, I'm thinking about you and I looking into, I won't get into it now, but looking into a slot cheat case from years ago when we were going through some of that information. A lot of the stories that were broken about that, Jeff Gehrman. So, yeah, there will be a lot that comes out, Tommy, between now and the trial and in the trial. That'll definitely be worth staying on top of.
I appreciate you coming back on. You're always fun to talk to and have on as a guest. I mean, and I'm sure you and I will talk many times.
Love it. Thank you, Tommy. Thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. It's a great honor to Jeff.
You are more than welcome. And Jeff deserves the show. And listeners, if you haven't heard or don't know who Jeff Gehrman is, please do your research and find out more about him. We gave you a really good capsule of who Jeff is, but if you want to know more yourself, please do yourself a favor and do some research on his own. That's going to do it for this episode of Before the Lights. Make sure you do 30 seconds for me and rate and review the show. It helps me grow the show immensely. Until next time, I'm Tommy Canelli. A salute, a chin chin.